Hello everyone in Los Angeles. I am Tomoki Takeda. I'm a professor of Daito Bunka University in Tokyo, Japan. I teach the history of Japanese politics and international relations of the 20th century to Japanese students in this university. Today, I am here in my lab on the campus of my school for recording this video because the whole world is trying to contain the spread of COVID-19. I can't make a trip to Los Angeles today. First of all, I would like to show my gratitude to Japan Society and everyone in SCU for preparing this seminar in spite of many difficulties and giving me the opportunity to talk to you, my fellow history teachers in the United States through videos. My video will be divided into two parts, and in part one I'd like to give a short introduction to the history of Japanese politics and its impact over the East Asian politics. These are the topics of the part one of this video. I would like to take a brief look at the geography and culture of Japan. And I will talk about the traditional Japanese attitude for the international environment in East Asia, especially in terms of international order of that region. And I will summarize the Japanese political tradition as a foundation for the modernization started in the middle of the 19th and flourished since the late 19th century. And these 2 points is the body of part one. I traced how Japan opened its door to the world in the middle of the 19th century, and I will talk about the interesting role of the United States of America during the process. In the first half of this talk, in part one, we will begin by looking at pictures and maps in order to understand what underlies Japanese culture, politics, and history, and its unique position, Japan's unique position in East Asia, we are going to talk about, with two questions. First question is Japan small? You can see Japan in this map on the screen. Japan looks small along the Chinese continent. Is Japan small? This is the first question. And the second question is, are Japanese homogeneous? We Japanese tend to describe, I'm a Japanese. We Japanese tend to describe our country as a small, isolated island country. And most of us tend to think that it is the reality of Japan. Let's find out this remark is true or false. Here is the first pictures I would like to show you. These are the pictures of Hokkaido. Hokkaido is the second largest island of Japanese archipelago, and obviously it is located in the north. Let's look at the next pictures. These are the pictures of Okinawa. Okinawa is one of the prefectures of Japan, which is obviously located in the south. Now you can see the, totally different landscape of northern Japan and southern Japan. That indicates that the Japanese archipelago is long enough to have these differences in the north-south direction. Let's look at the map of Japan again to confirm this fact. This is Japanese archipelago, and this island is Hokkaido. And this largest island is called Honshu, where Tokyo lies in the center. And this small island is called Shikoku, and this island is called Kyushu. Japanese archipelago consists of these four major islands, but actually the archipelago consists of 6,852 islands lying along the east coast of Chinese continent, and the archipelago is some 3,000 kilometers from Hokkaido to Okinawa. Now we know that Japan is a long country, but it seems very small besides the Chinese continent. It does, partly because most of the map uses the Mercator projection. The Mercator projection is a cylindrical map projection presented by a Flemish geographer in the 16th century, and it became the standard map projection for navigation system because it is unique in presenting north as up and south as down, while preserving local directions and shapes. But as a side effect, the Mercator projection inflates the size of object away from the equator. So let's put Japan on the map of USA with the true size. Japan is smaller, obviously, smaller than the United States of America. It is the same size as Montana, probably. But it doesn't look that small. Then let's put Japan on the map of European continent in true size. As I said, Japan is a long country, and Japanese archipelago is larger than Italy, even United Kingdom. Actually, Japan's total area is placed at the 61st place in the world, and the population is over 120 millions, and it's in the 11th place. And GDP, nominal GDP, is more than $5,000. No, $5,000 trillion, and it's in the third place. So Japan is not small. Be careful. We Japanese sometimes lie. Let's go to the next question. Japanese often describe their culture is homogeneous. But this guy, Shuichi Kato, brilliant Japanese intellectual, once said, Japanese culture is crossbred from the outset. Why did he say that? You can find the picture of Shosoin, reportedly, This is the treasure repository of ancient Japanese emperors. It tells us the reason why. The repository holds 1,300 years old, a total of 9,000 arts and crafts from overseas, but it also holds many products by Japanese craftsmanship, influenced by foreign cultures. The treasures of the repository shows Japanese distinctive culture, which blends foreign civilizations and foreign influence into one, and combine them with indigenous elements. If you like folklores, you can find many folklores over Japan, which tells that foreign visitors or foreign ghosts or foreign monsters came to the coast of Japan with sometimes early but beneficial information or technologies or cultures to Japanese locals. So we must realize that Japan was made of multiple foreign civilizations, influences, and cultures since ancient times. Another pictures will show us Japan has a history of annexing and conquering some ethnic groups and kingdom. Now you can see the pictures of Ainus. Japan once conquered the land of Ainus. Hokkaido originally was their land. They flourished their distinctive culture in Hokkaido, and the culture was widespread over the borders, beyond the borders of present Japan and Russia. Next picture will show us the beautiful landscape of the old capital of Ryukyu Kingdom of Ryukyu. It was in Okinawa, which was once independent of Japan, and it was made a tributary country in the 17th century, and later in the 19th century completely annexed as a prefecture of Japan. But before this happened, this is where the kingdom of Ryukyu located, and this is Japan's archipelago, and this is Chinese continent, and this is Southeast Asian countries. The kingdom of Ryukyu made the most of this strategic position as an island country, became the center of the wide trade network among China, Japan, and East Asian nations. Now we are trying to preserve these precious traditions of Ainus and Ryukyu Kingdom, but we have to know that Japan were a kind of combination state before we build up the Western-style nation-state in 19th century. So do you think Japan was an isolated island country and Japanese society is homogeneous? I don't believe so. Moreover, Japan has been paying a careful attention to its international environment in East Asia. Before the Westphalian system was introduced in East Asia by Western powers and Japan in the 19th century, there was a traditional hierarchical system with China at the center or at the top of the hierarchical international order. It is called the Sinocentrism. It is interesting to know that once a fixed part of that international order, Japan was a tributary state to China once, but Japan cut off the vassal relationship with China sometime as early as in the 6th century. It was probably because Japan regarded itself as independent and equal culture with this great Chinese civilization. However, the international order Japan conceived had a similar structure as I already mentioned, with the hierarchical order, and such petty hierarchical international order could coexist with greater, big Chinese-made international order in the same region. In so doing, Japan continued to soak up the learnings and advanced sciences and industrial techniques and goods from China without vassal relationship. So it is fair to say that the Japanese in the ancient period selectively shared and accepted Chinese civilization and its international order. So in conclusion, I would like to summarize as the Japan was at the periphery of the great Chinese civilization, but not completely involved, a part of the order. However, it was neither completely secluded from it. Japan paid a careful attention to its environment in East Asia. So let's look at the domestic side of Japanese politics. I have been using Japan as a subject in my previous talk, but people who resided in the islands of Japan had no sense of national unity at all. Japan's national unity in the current form began to emerge around the Meiji Restoration in 1867. However, in the 7th century, Emperor Tenji and Tenmu started regional unification around Kyoto, old capital of Japan, and established a new system based on the model of the continental war called Ritsuryo. The system flourished as Japan's unique system of its own, lasting over 500 years with the emperor, Japanese emperor, Tenno, at the top of the system. This is the social hierarchy of the pre-modern Japan. And the system is substantially equal to the emperor system, and the system would be restored when another Japanese political regime fell during the great political turmoil in the 19th century. The another system is called shogunate. By the 12th century, the elite class of the emperor system in the east of Japan became the military class, whose mission was to protect the emperor's land from the barbarians in the east. The people of eastern Japan who did not obey the imperial court was called emishi. I'm from the eastern part of Japan, so my ancestor could be one of them. Anyway, the Minamoto clan gradually gained control over the eastern provinces while engaging this crucial security project of conquering or expelling emishis on behalf of the imperial court. In the meantime, Emperor was still in Kyoto, the capital, and continued to be the head of the central government, but gave a special broad authority to Minamotos in the military headquarters in the east. The Minamotos, with emperor's directives, could nominate governors in each province, eastern province, to protect law and order. In other words, the Minamotos had been given broad powers to govern the eastern country. When the imperial court, this is the old imperial court in Kyoto, when the imperial court recognized the eastern headquarters as the official seat of the government, the shogunate period began. This Kamakura headquarters in the 12th century is the first government called shogunate. And other similar regimes ruled eastern Japan during the next 7 centuries. And the most well-known is the Tokugawa shogunate, which lasted over 2 centuries. And these many centuries, during these many centuries, the dual system of imperial court at the top and shogunate at the second layer lasted for years, and the distinctive special relationship between the emperor and the government. Emperor is the so-called authority power, and a shogun is the actual ruler of Japan, began to formulate, and keeping these two dual system in harmony. This is a very, distinctive, special relationship. And when Tokugawa shogunate was established in the 17th century by Ieyasu, this is Ieyasu, after winning of the Great Civil War at Sekigahara in 1603, chose Edo, present Tokyo, as headquarters of his regime. His choice of Edo as a substantial capital of his regime had a great impact on Japanese society, because it shifted the center of Japanese society from Western Japan to Eastern Japan, and it also changed social values of Japanese society from those of aristocracy in Kyoto and those of warrior society in the East. The warriors stressed loyalty to superiors and honor and frugality. Such values the warrior developed became known as Bushido in Japanese and maybe worldwide. Bushido means a bushi is the warrior. Do means the way. So Bushido means the way of the warrior developed and formulated. Although the bushis, samurais, realized they would fight less frequently after the Tokugawa shogunate began. And warriors gradually became administrators as peace prevailed, keeping their warrior spirit in heart. Bushido began to be regarded as a moral code of the Japanese ruling class. The well-known Japanese values and cultures, including these two, kabukis, the Japanese traditional theater developed in the Edo period, and tea ceremony, which was originally a part of the way of Bushido, the way of the warriors, began to flourish among the ruling class. And the bushis were required to live in towns inside their lord's castle. But the majority of bushis were assigned to administrative duties, while they always have to be prepared carry on military duties if the lord wanted. But gradually, literacy and pragmatic educations became important to gain high positions in the society, And castles, once a strategic fortress, became a symbol of the lord's authority and dignities. And gradually, a castle became the center of politics, administration, and a town grew around the castle walls with townsmen. They're called chonin in Japanese, living in separate districts around the Bushi residence from the castle town. In Edo period, there was supposedly 200 or some 250 castle towns over Japan. And 2 centuries peace after the establishment of the Tokugawa shogunate created an increase in productivity, and by the end of 17th century, many of the merchant class became quite prosperous. And the merchants who made a bourgeois culture called chonin bunka, townsman's culture, created a new demand for goods and services all over Japan. And they enjoyed kabuki and the tea ceremony as well. And some of them, became the low-ranking bushis, entering the ruling class of the each castle towns. So the culture of bushi, intertwined with the townsman's culture, became widespread around Japan. So I would like to conclude this section by stressing that these changes and the development of Japanese society could be seen across Japan, and the class system, values of a bushi class, and the cultures, and that those of the wealthy townsmen prevailed under Tokugawa peace, and the social order and the cultural values created in this century made a very essential foundation of national unity, which would be constructed in the coming century. So let's look at the international side of the same period, which also important to understand deeply how Japan started the modernization in the coming century. In order to keep the society peaceful and the Tokugawa rule stable, the Tokugawa shogunate went into national seclusion in the early 17th century. But before that, Tokugawa developed a system of maritime trade paths. It's called Shuinjo, vermilion seal. Shu means color, vermilion. In means seal, The vermilion seal ship trading system was developed under the Tokugawa shogunate. And the official record shows that the total of 356 licenses were issued before 1631, before the national seclusion edict was issued. The system was to serve 2 purposes: to distinguish real merchants from pirates, and to allow the government to control profitable sea routes. Like Tokugawa, most Japanese leaders of the late 16th century and the early 17th century welcomed the foreign trades and arriving Europeans. For local lord, during the period of warring state in the 16th century, the Europeans provided access to important information. Europeans had very useful knowledge about geography and shipbuilding, navigation system, and the military technology, muskets. And they brought very special foreign goods in trade that were unavailable in Japan nor in Asia. And some lords in the southern area of Japan became interested in Christianity, partly because of their interest in trade with European traders. Some Western lords were actually baptized and made their domains prosperous and rich with foreign aid. Japan unifiers became suspicious of those who came as Christian missionaries for two reasons. First, Christianity prepared the need of exclusive loyalty to God, which meant obedience to foreign God instead of Japanese Lord or possible future unifiers. Second, they became a threat to the central government in the eastern part of Japan, or both in the western Kyoto. Became the threat to central government, giving Western lords access to advanced foreign goods and military technology. So as early as 1587 and later in 1614, decrees were issued saying that all Jesuits, then all the missionaries, to leave this country. So anti-Christian attitude reached a peak in the 1630s, and several Kyushu lords and the people, including discontented Bushi class, became Christian and formed an uprising against the Tokugawa shogunate authority because of the heavy taxation. And Tokugawa sent a huge army to suppress the rebellion in Kyushu. And these episodes inspired the Japanese Christian writer of the 20th century, Shusaku Endo, and his great novel, Silence, was made into a movie by Martin Scorsese in 2017. This is one of the greatest movies I've ever seen, and please watch this movie if you have time. And between 1633 and 1639, the Tokugawa shogunate issued a series of seclusion edicts. Finally, one banned the teaching and practice of Christianity, and second one forbade Japanese to travel abroad, and especially forbade Japanese to return from the overseas, and third banned Portuguese ship from entering any Japanese port, and fourth restricted foreign trade. You can see in the next page the example of the exclusion edict issued in 1636. And with these exclusion edicts, Japan entered a kind of a national seclusion which lasted over 2 centuries. But actually, Japan was never completely secluded. In those long years, the Tokugawa shogunate controlled foreign trades and diplomatic relations single-handedly in 4 places. This is the picture. The image indicates that 4 places. Nagasaki. This is the one of the 4 places. And at Nagasaki, the Tokugawa shogunate made trade with Chinese and Dutchies. And at Satsuma, Satsuma, here, Satsuma domain, the Tokugawa shogunate continued the trade with Ryukyu kingdom. And Tsushima, through Tsushima with the Koreans, and Matsumai. Matsumai is a place in Hokkaido. You can see the castle. Matsumai. Oh, here. Matsumai. With Ainus. And at Dijima, Dutch traders sometimes they have to live in a cramped house, but they could sometimes enjoy sake and sashimi, sushis, in their house. And what's more, by the 1720s, the shogunate stopped trying to keep out European influence, lifting the ban on importing foreign books as long as they did not mention Christianity. And people other than the government officer were also allowed to engage in foreign learning through Dutch, called Orandangaku. Oranda means Holland, Gaku means learning, so Dutch learning. And through Dutch learning, obtained Western knowledge had a significant impact on Japan, Japan's way of thinking. It changed the way it saw Japan, China, and the West. Through these books, through these informations, Japanese intellectuals learned that Western technology had already surpassed Chinese ones. Japanese ruling class, they were with warrior mind, are very familiar with thinking in military terms. They are very sensitive about power balance, The more pro-Western camp increased, the more nationalist camp appeared. However, the School of National Learning, Kokugaku, which started as a literary movement, gradually became political movement. And such scholars of Kokugaku, national learning, said it was important to study the Japanese distinctive writings in order to learn how to govern this divine land. The scholars started to describe Japan as a land of, gods. Their studies laid the important, essential basis for a conservative reaction to foreign fled in the coming century, in the 19th century, stressing the place of the emperor in Japanese society and culture. They would express their ideas in the slogan Sonno Joi, revere the emperor, expel the barbarian. On the other hand, strictly controlled foreign relations by the central government forced local lords and townsmen on the other hand, the strictly controlled foreign relations by the central government forced local lords and townsmen to develop local economy in their own domains. The extensive road system which the central government created and maintained through these centuries helped them send goods using transportation network which connects local castle towns with major cities such as Edo, Kyoto, and Osaka. The shogunate also depended on coastal shipping and cargo boat trade along the long coast of Japan. So all these traders in Osaka and castle towns along the coast of Japan, the port towns along the coast, became quite prosperous. In sum, national seclusion, or precisely strictly controlled foreign trade and information policy, developed two camps to Western civilization. But it also helped to create local economy and you know diversified culture, very rich culture, to be and the network of them by the countrywide transportation system. The former prepare the strong tension when they faced the Western threat, and the former laid the foundation for the modernization and the national unity in the coming century. The crucial 19th century opened with the frequent appearances of foreign ships along the Japanese coast, as you can see on the screen. It was a time for Western powers to assert their power to gain more resources and goods from East Asian region to make their country prosperous. It was the beginning of the era of imperialism, or the Industrial Revolution. In Japan, there are two voices facing the trend. One is down with shogunate and away with foreign barbarians, and the other is go against the shogunate, and open doors to help barbarians in trouble. The seclusion group was not a radical, but a conservative at the beginning. And in the 1820s and 30s, there occurred the hard debates over policy of seclusion and of the shogunate, and some denounced the shogunate attitude of keeping out shut against foreign ships' appearances along the coast. By the 1820s, Western whalers searching for whales in the Pacific Ocean began to appear. They especially looked for whales in the sea of east of Japan. It was called Japan Ground. In the West, you may be familiar with the history, but in the West, in the middle of the 19th century, lamp oil came from whales. This is the label of whale oil. And American whaling ships were at sea for months or even years as they hunted for whales. They needed sometimes they needed fresh supplies of water and food, and they needed a land to order in order to make repairs. And at other times, they actually became stranded and were unable to sail away. That's why foreign ships appeared along the coast of Japan during the 1820s and 1830s. But these incidents made the shogunate deeply aware of the vulnerability of Japanese coast. And in 1825, shogunate issued a command telling the local lords to drive the foreign ships away without hesitation. In 1844, after the Opium War, the command was eased, but the shogunate never wanted to open ports to barbarians. With Russians and French overtures for trade and friendly relations in the 19th century, the United States of America successfully opened the Japanese door in the 1850s. To protect whalers and other types of ships, U.S. President Mr. Fillmore dispatched this guy, Navy man, Commodore Matthew Perry to Japan. Perry's fleet of 4 ships arrived at Edo Bay in July 1853, and these black ships were huge. They were 6 or more times the size of Japanese ships. They carried 61 cannons, and Commodore Perry delivered a set of demands from President Fillmore, and he said he would return for a response from the Japanese government. And as promised, Perry returned on February 1854 with a fleet of 9 ships, including 3 huge steamships. Ultimately, the shogunate decided that it had to agree to the American demands, and it signed the Treaty of Peace and Amity between the United States and the Empire of Japan, commonly called the Kanagawa Treaty. The treaty included the opening of 2 ports, one in Shimoda. Shimoda is located at Honshu Island, and Hakodate is in Hokkaido. And Japan promised to supply American ships there in 2 ports. And Japan also agreed to provide good treatment of shipwrecked American ships. The treaty also allowed an American consul to be established in Shimoda, and this treaty ended the policy of so-called national seclusion, and the shogunate concluded similar treaties with the British, Russia, Dutch, French, and other Western countries in later years. And the first American consul general arrived in Shimoda in 1856. His name was Townsend Harris, and Harris began negotiating for an agreement on trade between the 2 countries. Harris argued that negotiating a treaty with the United States was a good way to restrain European imperialism, and it would be also in Japan's self-interest. For Japan, looking at Chinese experience during the Opium War and Arrow War, negotiated treaty was far better than the forced treaty. So the shogunate tried to make a formula of the trade agreement with Harris, but this stance faced significant opposition from the lord of the old regime, and even from the anti-foreign imperial government, imperial court. And the opposition to the shogunate spread throughout the country immediately, and the opponents were, partly inspired by the scholars of national learnings, and the scholars stressed that the imperial system was the central element in Japan, and Japanese history itself, and this implied that Tokugawa shogunate was not fully legitimate. So-called Mito learning, Mitogaku, is the central school of the national learning, and it was not openly anti-shogunate, but it presented the idea that other ultra, nationalists adopted, and the slogan of Sonno-joi. This is the pictures of that school, Sonno-joi-ha. Their slogan was "Revere the Emperor, expose the barbarians." Carried out anti-Tokugawa policy throughout all over Japan, especially in Edo and Kyoto. And a lot of foreign citizens are killed, assassinated in Kyoto and Edo. And if you're not Japanese, Kyoto and Edo were the last cities you want to live in. And the opponents of the shogunate gained control of Choshu. Here, this is Choshu, Tosa, Hizen, and Satsuma. It's called Sacho Dohi. These four domains gained control of the opponents of the shogunate. And the shogunate attempted to punish Choshu with military power, but failed. The shogunate was losing control of the country. And Shogun Tokugawa Yoshinobu Yoshinobu announced in November 1867 that he was going to return political power to the emperor. And 3rd of January 1868, a group of Satsuma, Tosa, and other domains seized the imperial palace in Kyoto by the coup d'etat. They were able to get an imperial announcement that the Tokugawa government, the shogunate, was abolished, finally. And from then on, the announcement said, government power and all Tokugawa lands, a quarter of the land of the country, were returned to the imperial throne. Yoshinobu put up a short military resistance, but gave in within a month. And during the civil war, it's called the Boshin War, some 8,200 were killed, and another 5,000 were wounded. This revolution is called Meiji Revolution, was therefore not entirely a bloodless coup d'etat. However, it might have been much bloodier if this guy, Yoshinobu, had resisted for a longer period of time. The Meiji Revolution, Meiji Restoration, began with a coup d'etat, as I mentioned, in January 1868, and anti-shogunate forces led by the southern domains, such as Satsuma and Choshu, seized the imperial palace in Kyoto, and they announced that the shogun had returned political power to the emperor. But when the young emperor, you can see the pictures of young emperor Meiji, was going to rule the country. But the restoration did not take place overnight, It took many years to create a new kind of government. And I will talk about it in the part 2. But starting point for this historical process was the Charter of April of the same year. And this document was very interesting because it's designed to calm fears of those domains which did not participate in the restoration movement. And the oath promised that those domains would be included in decision-making process of the new regime. And it stated clearly that all matters shall be decided by public discussion. Although it did not give details, it said that the deliberative councils would be part of the new regime. This implied that feudal system would be completely abolished. And the former shogunate capital, Edo, was renamed Tokyo, and literally it became the capital of the new country, and it was designated as the new national capital. And the domains were eventually transformed into prefectures and administered by governors, not by local laws. And the central government took over responsibilities for education and the defense of the local domains, former local domains. To do this, the new government needed money, so it carried out land surveys in 1873 to determine the value of each piece of land. And it then introduced the new system of land taxes to raise money to run the government. Not surprisingly, there was resistance in the countryside. But after all, by the 1880s, at the end of the 1880s, Japanese leaders successfully built up a Western-like political institution in the new government, such as political parties, national assemblies, and bureaucracy, and the constitution. With Meiji Restoration, Japan took off as a first modern industrial nation-state in the East Asian region. The new leadership of Meiji Japan used several slogans to express their ideas. During the 1850s and early 1860s, many leaders called for expelling foreigners to avoid contamination from foreign ideas. But by the end of the 1860s, the Meiji leaders were more open to the West. And friendly to both Western people and Western ideas. They preferred this slogan, Wakon Yosai. It means Japanese spirit and Western knowledge. Some preferred this slogan as a way to balance tradition with innovative Western technology. Promoting Bunmei Kaika is also the favored slogan. Bunmei Kaika means civilization and enlightenment. The Meiji elite wanted to educate the common population with this slogan. This included everything from personal appearance to sports to technology. The government promoted civilization and enlightenment in many ways. Even Western clothing became mandatory for government officials. The government also supported more substantive efforts, such as the Iwakura Mission. In an effort to gain superior Western technology and ideas, during the Tokugawa period, some lords and the Tokugawa shogunate had sent students to study in Europe. But the most important venture abroad, however, took place after Meiji Restoration. It is called Iwakura Mission of 1871 to 1873. Some of the powerful figures in the new government, including Iwakura Tomomi, Okubo Toshimichi, Kido Takayoshi, and Ito Hirobumi, some of them will appear in my talk part 2, spent 22 months traveling in the United States and Europe. They observed a wide range of institutions and practices, including factories, schools, and legislatures. They returned to Japan deeply impressed by the economic power of Western modern industry and by the social power of the educated citizens. They also returned with the impression that Western superiority in many fields was relatively new. So therefore, they believed that Japan could become a modernized nation, and they believed that Japan should modernize first before building military defenses. So they combined experience, motivated the introduction of Western institutions such as universities, banks, post offices, and police systems. And overall, the Iwakura mission recognized that the success of the nation would depend on education and unification of the people, and unification of the government and people. And in order to establish qualifications for releasing Japan from the feudal society and as an independent, equal culture among the Western in the Western system, they would have to modernize Japan in every aspect. Japan need to change its education, legal system, its industry. That's how Japan started modernization in the 1870s. So my talk in part 1 will end here by quick and brief conclusion. The Meiji government, which was established by the radicals in 1867, adopted a friendly posture to Western powers. But we have to remember that they were the Sonno Joiha. They were radicals just a few years ago. Their conversion was crucial to the fate of Japan. Why did they change their minds and position? That's because they became conscious of the overwhelming Western strength and realized their agenda. Expel the barbarians was far from realization. That was the moment, I believe, when Japanese weathered the first international crisis they faced. They determined to adapt to the Western system, assuming that it would replace Chinese international order in the near future, with a very delicate balance of old and new, realism and idealism. The distinctive characteristics of Japanese attitude toward the international order or civilization was this pragmatism, the balanced view of the world. The warrior's mind of the ruling class might have served the purpose. For example, in China and Korea, where traditional bureaucrats served the country as a ruling class, could not cope with the crisis of the 19th century. The crisis was essentially militaristic. Secondly, Japanese traditional crossbred culture could be another reason of success. Japan was very good at blending old and new, combining heterogeneous elements with domestic ones. Thus, Japan could succeed in making friends out of possible fierce enemies. New ideas are often generated when different things are brought together. Japanese industrialization and democratization, starting from the 19th century to the 20th century, would be one of the textbook examples. However, as we'll see in part 2 of the video, after this tremendous, remarkable success, Japan could not take a right path, which would lead them to the glory. It went into the war with the world, including the United States of America, in the middle of the 20th century. So I will see you in part 2.